Some marks are carved on the skin to tell a story of survival, but the deepest wounds are the ones no one can see, the silent fractures in the soul that shape a life in shadow. They are the ghosts that walk beside you in the daylight, the chill that persists even in the warmest sun. Hope, in such a world, is a dangerous and fragile thing, a wildflower pushing through frozen earth, beautiful in its defiance, but destined to be crushed by the first careless frost. For Ilara, hope had died long ago, trampled under the weight of duty and cruelty, leaving only a grim, aching resolve. Now, that resolve was all she had left as she trudged through the endless biting snow of the Blackwood, a ghost herself in a world of white. Each crunch of her worn boots on the frozen ground was a count against her, a measure of the distance from a past she was cast out of, and the terrifying uncertainty of a future she might not live to see. The wind was a predator, clawing at the thin wool of her cloak, its icy teeth sinking into her bones. She was no longer Ilara of the Stone Creek pack, mate to the Alpha. She was nothing, a remnant, a failure. Her left hand, chapped and blue with cold, was pressed instinctively, permanently, against the slight swell of her belly. Inside, a tiny heart beat a frantic, fragile rhythm, a secret flame cupped against the gale of the world. This pup, this unborn child, was the only thing that was truly hers. It was the final living piece of her pain, the last legacy of a male she had never loved and would never mourn. Valerius was dead, his ambition and brutality finally meeting their match on a blood-soaked border. And his pack, in their grief and fury, had turned on her. The weak Omega, the scarred mate, the bad omen who had brought death to their leader. They had called her a curse, her muted scent a sign of impurity, the long silver scar that sliced from her temple to her jaw, a mark of her brokenness. They had taken everything, her meager belongings, her place by the fire, her name, and thrown her out into the teeth of the coming winter. Let the wilderness claim the curse, they had snarled. It was a death sentence, and they all knew it. But they had underestimated the fierce, desperate love of a mother. If you're captivated by Ilara's fight for survival, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what happens next in this epic werewolf saga. Every step was a battle. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on her, slowing her limbs, whispering of the sweet, final peace of surrender. Just lie down. Just sleep. But then she would feel a faint flutter from within, a tiny, insistent reminder of the life she carried, and a fresh wave of desperate strength would surge through her. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for this small, innocent soul who had not asked for this cold, cruel world. She stumbled, her ankle twisting on a hidden root beneath the snow, and fell hard against the rough bark of an ancient pine. The impact jarred a pained gasp from her lungs. For a moment she simply leaned there, her forehead pressed against the frozen wood, the scent of pine and frost filling her senses. The world swam in a haze of gray and white. I can't do this. The thought was a traitor, a sliver of ice in her heart. Her internal voice was weak, frayed. He is gone, but his cruelty remains. It lives in their eyes, in this cold, in this hunger. And it lives in me, in this child I carry, a child of violence. She shook her head, a violent, jerky motion. No, that was their poison, not hers. This pup was not Valerius. This pup was the spark of life that had survived the darkness. It was her redemption, not her shame. Pushing herself upright, she ignored the screaming protest of her muscles. She had been walking for 3 days, surviving on a handful of dried berries she'd had in her pocket, and the melting snow she scooped into her mouth. The hunger was a hollow, gnawing ache that had long ago become a part of her. She scanned the oppressive, uniform landscape. Towering pines, heavy with snow, stood like silent, indifferent sentinels. The sky was a low, oppressive ceiling of bruised purple clouds that promised more snow. There was no shelter, no sign of life, only the vast, deadly quiet of the winter woods. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was walking through the King's lands, a territory so vast and wild that it was said the Alpha King himself roamed it in his wolf form for weeks at a time. It was forbidden territory, and the punishment for trespassing was death. But what choice did she have? A swift death at the hands of the King's justice was no different from a slow one at the hands of the cold. At least it would be quicker. Her vision began to blur at the edges, the white of the snow merging with the gray of the sky. Her steps became heavier, her legs feeling like stone. She was losing. The cold was winning. With a final shuddering sigh, her body gave out. She didn't fall so much as crumple, sinking into a drift of snow that felt, for a terrifying moment, as soft as a feather bed. Her last conscious thought was not of fear, or of anger, or even of the man who had ruined her life. It was a simple, desperate plea, a whisper of a prayer sent to no one. Please. Not the pup. Let the pup live. The world went dark, the silence of the forest finally pulling her under into its deep, cold embrace. The snow began to fall again, soft, silent flakes dusting her still form, gently burying the outcast, the mother, the survivor, as if trying to hide her from the world that had so brutally rejected her. She was just another secret the ancient forest would keep. But some secrets were not meant to be kept. Even in the deepest silence, a king could hear the beat of a second heart where there should only be one. A presence pulled her from the depths of unconsciousness. It wasn't a sound or a touch, but a feeling, a shift in the oppressive weight of the wilderness. It was a warmth that had no source, a stillness that was not empty, but full. Ilara's eyelids fluttered, heavy as stones. The first thing she saw was gray, the flat, overcast sky through a lattice of dark pine branches. The second thing she felt was the cold, a deep, invasive chill that had settled into her very marrow. But it was less than before, a subtle lessening of the bite. Then she became aware of the scent. It was the smell of pine and frozen earth. Yes, but beneath it was something else. Something clean and powerful, like a storm gathering over a mountain peak, like the air after a lightning strike. It was ozone and rich soil, and something primally, undeniably male. A wolf. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of ice. A patrol. The King's justice had found her. She tried to move, to push herself up, but her limbs were numb and unresponsive. A shadow fell over her. She blinked, her vision slowly clearing, and found herself looking up at a figure that seemed carved from the very wilderness around him. He was tall, impossibly so, wrapped in dark, practical furs that did little to hide the sheer breadth of his shoulders. Snow dusted his dark hair and the collar of his cloak. But it was his face that stole her breath. It was a face of stark, severe beauty, all sharp angles and uncompromising lines, as if sculpted by a glacier's slow, relentless passage. His eyes, the color of winter twilight, were fixed on her, and their intensity was a physical force. There was no pity in them, no disgust, only a deep, unnerving focus, as if he were looking past her skin, past her bones, and directly into the trembling core of her soul. This was no mere patrolman. The power rolling off him was immense, an ancient elemental force that made the very air around him hum. This was the Alpha King, Theron, a myth made flesh. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of her exhaustion. She was trespassing. She was flawed, an outcast. He would see her scar, her weakness, and pass his judgment. She braced herself for the harsh command, the cold dismissal, the final, fatal blow. She tried to speak, to beg, but her throat was raw and her lips were cracked and frozen. Only a dry, rasping sound escaped. He knelt beside her in the snow, the movement fluid and silent, like a predator. But his presence, so close now, was not threatening. It was grounding. The chaotic storm of her fear began to settle, soothed by the immense calm he projected. His gaze drifted from her eyes to the silvery line of her scar. She flinched, expecting revulsion. His expression did not change. His eyes moved lower to where her hand was still protectively splayed over her womb, a gesture so ingrained she hadn't even realized she was making it. He saw. Of course he saw. He saw everything. A long moment stretched, suspended in the silent, falling snow. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ilara watched him, waiting for the verdict on her life, on the life of her pup. He finally spoke, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate not in the air, but inside her chest. It was a voice that commanded mountains to move and storms to cease. "You are not trespassing." The words were simple, direct, yet they shattered her reality. She stared at him, uncomprehending. Confusion warred with the instinct to flee. He must be mistaken. Or this was a cruel trick, a prelude to a more painful punishment. He seemed to read her thoughts, a faint, almost imperceptible softening at the corners of his mouth. "The king's lands are a sanctuary for those who have none." He extended a hand. It was large, calloused, yet the gesture was unthreatening, an invitation. "You are safe here." Safe. The word was alien. She had not been safe since she was a child, before her muted scent had marked her as less, before her parents had bartered her away to a brutal alpha for political gain. Safety was a concept from a forgotten language. Hesitantly, as if expecting the offer to be snatched away, she placed her trembling, frozen hand in his. His grip was firm, his skin radiating a startling, life-giving heat that flowed up her arm and into her chest, chasing away the deadly chill. He pulled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. For a dizzying moment she swayed, her head light, and he steadied her, one hand on her arm, the other hovering near the small of her back. The proximity was overwhelming. The scent of him enveloped her, a potent, intoxicating mix of power and wilderness that should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like a shield, like a promise. "I am in the presence of the Alpha King, and he is not killing me." Her internal monologue was a disbelieving whisper. "He looks at my scar and he does not sneer. He knows I carry another's pup, and he does not cast me aside. Why?" He watched the play of emotions on her face, his twilight eyes missing nothing. He seemed to understand her confusion, her deep-seated distrust of kindness. Without another word, he shrugged off his own heavy fur cloak and draped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, imbued with his scent and his impossible warmth. It settled over her like a benediction, a tangible barrier against the world. "Come," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, yet holding no trace of command. "There is shelter nearby." He began to walk, his steps sure and steady in the deep snow, and she found herself following, drawn along in the wake of his immense quiet power. The heavy cloak shielded her from the wind, and the warmth from his hand, which he had not released, continued to seep into her, a slow, steady tide against the encroaching ice. She was weak, starving, and terrified, an outcast with nothing to her name but a scarred face and a secret life in her womb. And she was walking through a blizzard beside the most powerful wolf on the continent, wrapped in his cloak, holding his hand. The world had gone mad. Or perhaps, for the first time in a very long time, it was finally starting to make sense. Will Ilara survive? And what will the Alpha King do when he discovers her secret? Like this video if you're rooting for her, and drop a comment with your predictions. The shelter was a cabin, nestled so perfectly into a grove of ancient firs that it seemed to have grown there. It was built of dark, sturdy logs, with smoke curling from a stone chimney in a lazy, welcoming plume against the gray sky. It was a picture of rustic peace, a stark contrast to the brutal, unforgiving wilderness they had just traversed. The warmth that hit Alara as Theron pushed open the heavy wooden door was a physical shock. It was a deep, penetrating heat from a large hearth where a fire crackled and danced, casting flickering orange light across the room. The air smelled of burning pine, drying herbs, and the faint, clean scent of cedar. After the endless, sterile white of the forest, the richness of the sensory details was overwhelming. The single room was spacious and Spartan, yet comfortable. A large handmade table and chairs stood in the center. A thick fur rug was spread before the fire, and a bed, piled high with quilts and furs, was tucked into a far corner. It was a space built for solitude and survival, yet it felt more like a home than the cold stone halls of Valerius's lodge ever had. Theron led her to one of the chairs by the fire, his hand still gently but firmly on her arm. He released her only when she was safely seated, sinking into the smooth, worn wood. She felt boneless, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion now that the immediate threat of freezing to death had passed. She watched him through heavy-lidded eyes as he moved about the cabin with an economy of motion that was both graceful and powerful. He stoked the fire, sending a fresh shower of sparks up the chimney before ladling a thick, savory-smelling stew from a pot hanging over the flames into a wooden bowl. He placed it on the table in front of her, along with a hunk of dark bread and a cup of steaming herbal tea. He did it all without a word, his silence as comfortable and unassuming as the warmth of the fire. Alara stared at the food. It had been so long since she'd seen a proper meal. The aroma alone made her stomach clench with a painful, desperate hunger. Yet she hesitated. Every kindness in her life had come with a price, every meal earned with submission, every moment of peace paid for with a piece of her soul. What does he want? The question echoed in the fearful chambers of her mind. No one gives shelter to a stray. No one feeds a curse. There is a reason. There is always a reason. Theron seemed to sense her hesitation. He sat in the chair opposite her, not eating himself, but simply watching her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "It is just stew," he said, his voice calm and even. "There is no poison in it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that transformed his severe features into something unexpectedly gentle. It was so out of place that it jolted her. A tension-breaking flicker of humor in the face of a near deity. "Eat," he urged softly. "For the little one, if not for yourself." His gaze flickered to her belly, and for the first time she felt no shame, no fear of judgment. His acknowledgement was simple fact, devoid of condemnation. That small kindness was what finally broke through her defenses. With a trembling hand, she picked up the spoon. The first bite of stew was an explosion of flavor and warmth, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. It was rich with meat and root vegetables, seasoned perfectly. It was the taste of life itself. She ate ravenously, not caring that she was being watched, her focus narrowed to the simple, profound act of nourishing herself, of nourishing her pup. She devoured the stew and the bread, then drank the tea, its gentle heat spreading through her chest, soothing the raw edges of her fear. When she was finished, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a warm, heavy contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The fire, the food, the quiet sanctuary of the cabin. It was all working a slow magic on her frozen spirit. She finally looked up and met his gaze directly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. He simply inclined his head, accepting her gratitude as if it were his due, yet without a trace of arrogance. He took her empty bowl and refilled her cup, his movements deliberate and measured. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the mournful sigh of the wind outside. It was not an awkward silence. It was a shared space, a quiet communion that required no words. Ilara found herself studying him, this mythic alpha king. He was nothing like the brutal, swaggering alphas she had known. Valerius had been all noise and bluster, his power a weapon he wielded constantly to intimidate and dominate. Theron's power was a deep, still ocean. He had no need to prove it. It simply was. It was in the calm certainty of his gaze, the quiet confidence of his posture, the way the very world seemed to bend to his will without him ever raising his voice. He is the storm and the shelter all at once, she thought, the observation startling her with its poetic clarity. He could unmake me with a word, and yet, I feel no fear. She felt a profound weariness begin to pull at her, the adrenaline of survival finally draining away, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Her head grew heavy, and her eyes began to drift shut. Sleep. His voice rumbled softly from across the table. You are guarded here. It was not a suggestion, but a gentle command, a permission she hadn't realized she was desperate for. She didn't have the strength to argue, or even to move to the bed. Her head drooped, and she slumped forward, her consciousness fading into the welcoming darkness, lulled by the crackling fire and the impossible feeling of being, for the first time in forever, completely and utterly safe. Her last waking sensation was of being lifted, as easily as a child, into strong arms that smelled of pine and winter storms, and then the feeling of being gently lowered into a sea of soft, warm furs. Ilara awoke slowly, drifting up from a deep and dreamless sleep. The first thing she registered was the profound comfort of her surroundings. She was cocooned in a mountain of soft furs and heavy quilts, the likes of which she hadn't felt since she was a girl in her parents' home. The air was warm and still, carrying the scent of wood smoke and cedar. The fire in the hearth had been banked to a gentle, glowing orange, casting a soft, peaceful light over the cabin. For a moment she allowed herself to simply exist in this state of perfect contentment, her body warm, her belly full, her mind quiet. Then memory returned, flooding her with a jolt. The snow, the collapse, the king. She sat up abruptly, her heart beginning to pound. The furs pooled around her waist. She was in the bed in the corner of the cabin. Theron was not in the room. A flicker of panic, sharp and familiar, ignited in her chest. Had he left her? Had it all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by cold and starvation? She pushed the furs aside, her bare feet touching the cool, smooth wood of the floor. She was still in her worn, travel-stained dress. His heavy cloak was draped carefully over the back of a nearby chair. It was real. He was real. The cabin door opened, letting in a swirl of cold air and a flurry of snowflakes. Theron stepped inside, shaking the snow from his dark hair. He carried several logs in the crook of one arm, which he deposited neatly into a woodbox by the hearth. He moved with a silent, lethal grace that was mesmerizing to watch. He seemed to be a part of the natural world, as elemental as the snow and the trees. He turned, and his twilight eyes found hers. He didn't seem surprised to see her awake. He simply nodded, a small, acknowledging gesture. "There is more stew," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room, "and fresh water." Her panic subsided, replaced by a new, more complex emotion: awe, and a deep, unsettling curiosity. Why was he doing this? Kings did not rescue half-frozen outcasts and nurse them back to health in their private hunting cabins. They had servants for that. They had healers. They did not personally ladle stew and tend fires for a scarred she-wolf carrying another male's pup. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive posture she fell into without thinking. Why? The word was barely a whisper, but in the stillness of the cabin, it sounded like a shout. He paused in the act of adding a log to the fire and looked at her over his shoulder. Why what? Why are you helping me? She clarified, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. I am nothing. An outcast from a minor pack. A trespasser. You are the king. He turned to face her fully, leaning one hand against the stone mantel of the fireplace. The firelight played over the sharp planes of his face, making him look like some ancient, stern deity. Your pack's judgment is not mine, he stated simply. And I am king of all wolves, not just the strong or the fortunate. Or do the weak not deserve the protection of their king? The question was rhetorical, a gentle chiding that made her flush with shame. Of course they did. It was the foundation of the law he upheld. But law and practice were two very different things in the cutthroat world of the packs. They called me a curse, she admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. My scent is muted. They said it was a sign of a flawed bloodline. Valerius, my mate. He died. They said I was an ill omen, that I weakened him. She had never spoken these words aloud to anyone. Saying them now, to him, felt like lancing a wound. Theron's expression hardened, a dangerous glint entering his eyes. They are fools, he said, the words clipped and sharp. Scent is not the measure of a wolf's worth, and a male who is weakened by his mate was never strong to begin with. The casual dismissal of Valerius, a powerful alpha in his own right, was stunning. Theron spoke of him as if he were a mere annoyance, a gnat to be swatted away. It was a staggering display of the chasm between their levels of power. He pushed away from the mantel and took a step toward her. She instinctively tensed, but he stopped a respectful distance away. Your scent, he said, his voice softening slightly, is not muted. It is quiet, subdued, like a river running deep beneath the earth instead of a raging flood on the surface. It speaks of resilience, not weakness, of a strength that is internal, hidden. They were simply too deafened by their own noise to hear it. Alara stared at him, speechless. No one had ever described her scent that way. It had always been a source of shame, a mark of her inadequacy. He spoke of it as if it were a rare and precious thing. He sees me. The thought was a revelation, a sunbeam breaking through a lifetime of clouds. He does not see the outcast, the scarred, the cursed. He sees me. Just then, a sharp sound from outside broke the spell, the unmistakable crunch of boots in snow and the low murmur of voices. Theron's head snapped up, his entire demeanor changing in an instant. The calm, gentle protector vanished, replaced by the formidable, dangerous king. His eyes narrowed, and a low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He moved to the door, pulling it open before the visitors had a chance to knock. Standing in the snow were two large, grim-faced wolves in the gray and black colors of the Stone Creek pack. Kale, and his enforcer, Borin. Alara's blood ran cold. It was Valerius's brother. He had his dead brother's cruel mouth and small, calculating eyes. "Your Majesty," Kale said, his voice a mixture of false deference and arrogance. He bowed his head, but not before his eyes flicked past Theron, trying to see into the cabin. He was hunting, not for her, for her pup. "We have tracked a fugitive from our pack into your lands, a she-wolf, Alara. She is a thief and an omen of bad luck. We have come to reclaim what is ours." Theron did not move. He seemed to grow larger, filling the entire doorway with his presence. The air around him crackled with unspoken power. "There is no fugitive here," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "There is only a guest under my protection." Kale's eyes widened slightly, his arrogance faltering in the face of the king's quiet, absolute authority. But she carries my brother's heir. It is a matter of blood right. The pup belongs to the Stone Creek pack. Theron took a slow, deliberate step forward, out of the cabin and into the snow. The two wolves from Stone Creek instinctively took a step back. You speak of blood right. Theron's voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates. Let me speak of a higher law. The pup belongs to its mother, and the mother belongs to no one. She is under my protection. You will leave my lands now, and you will not return. If you or any of your pack ever threaten her again, I will burn Stone Creek to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. The threat was delivered without heat, a simple statement of fact that was more terrifying than any shout. Cale paled, his bravado completely evaporating. He stammered something, an apology or a plea, before he and Boren turned and fled, stumbling through the snow like frightened rabbits. Theron watched them go, his posture radiating lethal intent until they were swallowed by the trees. Then, the immense power receded, and he turned back to the cabin. He looked at Alara, who stood frozen in the middle of the room, her hand pressed to her belly, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. He had not just protected her, he had claimed her. He had drawn a line in the snow around her and dared the entire world to cross it. The king had declared her his. Are you feeling the chemistry between Alara and Theron? Show your support by giving this video a thumbs up and sharing it with friends who love werewolf romance. In the days that followed, a strange and quiet routine settled over the cabin. The blizzard passed, leaving behind a world draped in pristine, glittering white, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The fierce cold remained, but inside the small log shelter a fragile warmth was beginning to grow, a warmth that had little to do with the crackling hearth. Theron did not speak of what had happened with Cale. He did not ask Alara about her past, about Valerius, or about the pup she carried. Instead, he gave her the one thing she had never been allowed: peace. He would leave for hours at a time, hunting in the silent, snow-laden forest, and would return with fresh game, his presence filling the small space with the scent of cold air and pine. Alara would spend that time resting, her body slowly recovering its strength. She found a small collection of books on a shelf, histories of the great packs, treatises on herbal lore, collections of old myths, and she would read by the fire, losing herself in stories that were not her own. When he was there, they often existed in a comfortable silence. He would mend his gear or sharpen his hunting knives with meticulous focus, while she would sew, repairing the tears in her worn dress with a needle and thread she found in a small wooden box. Sometimes he would speak, his deep voice filling the quiet, telling her about the forest, the names of the winter birds that flitted through the branches outside, or the way the wolves in his royal pack communicated through subtle shifts in the wind. He spoke of the world as if it were a living, breathing thing, full of secrets and wonder. He was teaching her, she realized, to see the beauty in the wilderness she had once viewed only as a threat. One evening, as she sat staring into the dancing flames of the fire, a wave of profound sadness washed over her. It was a grief not for Valerius, but for herself. For the life she had lost, for the years of fear and submission, for the girl she had been before she was sold and scarred. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, embarrassed by the show of weakness. But he saw. Of course, he saw. He put down the arrow he was fletching and moved to sit in the chair beside hers, his presence solid and reassuring in the dim light. Grief is not a weakness, he said softly, as if hearing her thoughts. It is a testament to what was endured. She shook her head, not looking at him. There is nothing to grieve. He was a monster. I am glad he is dead. You can be glad a monster is gone, he countered gently. and still grieve the parts of yourself he stole. His perception was a physical blow. He saw the truth of her, the tangled knot of relief and sorrow that she kept hidden even from herself. She finally turned to look at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "They say this pup is his legacy," she whispered, her voice thick with self-loathing. "That it is the last piece of him left in the world." Theron's expression was grim. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently place his hand on the arm of her chair, a gesture of support that did not invade her space. The warmth of his proximity was a comfort. "A seed is not the soil," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "Valerius was the cruel ground in which this life was planted, but you, Elara, are the sun and the water and the air. This pup is not his legacy. It is your triumph. It is the life that you nurtured in the darkness. It is yours, and yours alone." His words were a balm on a wound she hadn't known was festering. He was reframing her entire world, taking her greatest shame and turning it into her greatest strength. The pup was not a reminder of her pain. It was proof of her survival. "He does not see me as a vessel for another male's bloodline," she thought, a sense of wonder unfurling within her. "He sees me as a mother, as the sole creator of this life." She felt a flutter deep inside her womb, a strong, definite kick, as if the pup were listening, agreeing. Without thinking, she placed her hand over the spot. A small watery smile touched her lips. "He is strong," she murmured. She corrected herself. "I think it is a she." Theron's own gaze softened, a rare, genuine smile gracing his severe features. The sight was so unexpected, so breathtakingly beautiful, that it made her heart skip a beat. "May I?" he asked, his voice a low request. He held his hand out, palm up, hovering in the space between them. He was asking for permission to feel the life within her. It was a gesture of such profound respect, of such tender reverence, that it brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. Valerius had never touched her belly with anything but dismissive impatience. To him, the pregnancy was merely a means to an heir, a political necessity. To Theron, it was a miracle. Slowly, she nodded. He moved his hand with infinite care, laying it gently over hers on the swell of her stomach. His palm was broad and warm, blanketing her own, his touch sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated energy through her. Beneath their hands, the pup kicked again, a vigorous, lively thump against his palm. Theron's breath hitched. His twilight eyes met hers over their joined hands, and in their depths, she saw an emotion she could not name. It was a raw, unguarded vulnerability, a longing so deep it seemed ancient. In that moment, the chasm between them, king and outcast, vanished. They were simply a male and a female, sharing in the quiet wonder of a new life, their hands linked over a promise of the future. The intimacy of the moment was more profound than any kiss, more binding than any vow. It was a silent, soul-deep recognition. And for Elara, it was the moment a tiny, fragile flower of hope, which she had thought long dead, began to unfurl its petals in the protected warmth of his presence. The sanctuary of the cabin could not last forever. Elara knew this, even as a part of her wished she could stay suspended in this peaceful, timeless existence, just her and Theron and the quiet woods. But Theron was a king, and a king had duties that extended far beyond a single rescued she-wolf. A messenger arrived one morning, a grim-faced wolf from the royal pack, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He spoke to Theron in low, urgent tones by the cabin door, his words too quiet for Elara to hear, but the gravity of his expression was clear. When Theron came back inside, the quiet peace of the past week was gone, replaced by the heavy mantle of his authority. The king had returned. "I have to leave," he said, his voice flat. "There is a council of alphas being convened at the Citadel." Kale has formally challenged my right of protection over you. She claiming blood right, and he has garnered support from other packs who fear my power is becoming absolute. Alara's blood ran cold. She had foolishly thought Kyle's retreat was the end of it. She had underestimated his ambition and his malice. He is using my pup, she said, her voice trembling with a fresh wave of fury. He is using an unborn child as a pawn in his power games. Yes, Theron said, his eyes like chips of flint. And it will be the last mistake he ever makes. The cold certainty in his voice was terrifying, yet it was a terror directed entirely on her behalf, and that knowledge was a strange comfort. He began to prepare for his departure, gathering a pack with swift, efficient movements. Alara watched him, a hollow feeling opening in her chest. The thought of him leaving, of being left alone, was unbearable. The cabin, which had felt like a sanctuary, suddenly seemed fragile, its walls too thin to keep the world at bay without him standing guard. "Where will I go?" she asked, her voice small. He stopped what he was doing and turned to her. He crossed the room and stood before her, his expression softening as he took in her fear. "You are not going anywhere," he said firmly. "This place is warded. It is unreachable to any who do not know its location. You will be safer here than even in my own fortress, where Kale's spies might be listening from the shadows. I will leave 2 of my most trusted guards in the woods nearby. They will be unseen, but they will be here. No one will get to you." He was trying to reassure her, but his words only highlighted the danger. Spies, threats. A political firestorm was brewing, and she and her unborn daughter were the spark. She looked down at her hands, twisting the worn fabric of her dress. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I have brought you nothing but trouble." "Ilara." He said her name with a quiet intensity that made her look up. He reached out and gently cupped her chin, his thumb stroking softly against her skin, carefully avoiding her scar. "You have brought me clarity," he said, his voice a low murmur. "For too long, I have ruled from a distance. I have balanced politics and appeased ambitious fools like Kael. You have reminded me what it is I am truly fighting to protect. Innocence, strength, life. You have brought me no trouble. You have brought me a cause." His gaze was so intense, so full of a powerful, unspoken emotion that she felt her breath catch in her throat. She saw in his eyes the loneliness of a king, the burden of a crown worn for centuries. And she saw something else, something directed at her that made her heart ache with a hope she was terrified to name. "I am a scarred remnant," the old, cruel voice in her head whispered. "He is a king. This is a gilded cage, a temporary kindness. When this is over, the door will open and I will be let go." She pulled back slightly, breaking the contact, the internal doubt a poison seeping into the fragile trust she had built. "You are a king," she said, her voice flat. "You have a kingdom to consider. You cannot risk war for a stray." "You are not a stray," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through her self-deprecation. "You are important." He seemed to struggle with the word as if it were inadequate. The air between them was thick with things unsaid, with a connection that was growing too powerful to ignore and too new to define. He was leaving. That was the only certainty. He finished his preparations, shrugging on his heavy cloak. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. "I will return," he said. It was not a promise, it was a vow. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click, leaving her alone in the sudden, overwhelming silence of the cabin. The warmth of the room felt false now, the fire a poor substitute for the heat of his presence. She walked to the small window and watched his tall figure recede into the trees, a dark, solitary shape against the blinding white snow, until he disappeared from view. The silence pressed in on her. Days passed. The two guards Theron had mentioned remained ghosts in the woods. She never saw them, but she felt their presence, a subtle ward against the encroaching fear. But the fear was not only outside, it was inside her. The old doubts, the ingrained feelings of worthlessness, began to creep back in his absence. She would catch her reflection in the windowpane at night, the pale, haunted face, the silver slash of her scar, and she would wonder what a king could possibly see in such a broken thing. Cale's words echoed in her mind: thief, omen of bad luck. Perhaps her old pack was right. Perhaps she was a curse, bringing chaos and conflict to the one person who had shown her kindness. The loneliness was a physical ache. She missed the comfortable silences, the low rumble of his voice, the feeling of safety his mere presence provided. She would find herself holding the heavy cloak he had left behind, burying her face in the fur, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of him, pine and winter storm, and it was the only thing that brought her comfort. One afternoon, a week after he left, she was startled by a sharp cracking sound from the woods. Not the gentle noises of the forest, but the sound of a branch breaking under a heavy, careless weight. Her head snapped up, her senses on high alert. The feeling of being watched, of being protected, had vanished. It was replaced by a new feeling, the feeling of being hunted. She moved to the window, peering cautiously through the edge of the curtain. At first, she saw nothing but the trees and the snow. Then, a flicker of movement. A gray and black tunic. Stone Creek colors. It was not just one. She saw another. And another. They were moving through the trees surrounding the cabin. Cale had found her. The warded sanctuary had been breached. Terror, cold and absolute, seized her. Theron's guards. Where were they? Had they been overcome? Killed? She was alone. Trapped. Her first instinct was to hide, to cower in a corner and pray for a swift end. That was the old Ilara, the victim. But as her hand flew to her belly, a different instinct roared to life. A fierce, primal rage. They were not just threatening her, they were threatening her daughter. No. The word was a silent snarl in her mind. You will not have her. You will not touch her. She would not run. She would not hide. This cabin was the only home her daughter had ever known. It was the place Theron had declared her safe. She would not surrender it. She looked around the room, her eyes searching for a weapon. A fireplace poker, a skinning knife, something. But she knew she was no fighter. She could not defeat a dozen trained warriors with brute force, but perhaps she didn't have to. Valerius had taught her that power came from the fist. Theron had shown her that true power came from the will. Her strength was not in her claws, but in her spirit. She took a deep breath, calming the frantic beating of her heart. She would face them, not as a victim, but as a mother. She would not let her daughter's first moments in the world be tainted by her mother's fear. The cabin door burst open, splintering off its hinges. Cale stood on the threshold, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face. Behind him stood a dozen of his most brutal warriors. Nowhere left to run, little curse, he sneered, his eyes filled with a greedy, possessive light as he stared at her belly. The pup is mine by right. Ilara stood tall in the center of the room, her hand resting protectively on her womb. She met his gaze without flinching, her own eyes burning with a cold, clear fire he had never seen before. You have no rights here, she said, her voice quiet, yet ringing with an authority that made several of his men shift uneasily. This is the king's land. You are the trespasser. You are the one with nowhere to run. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. If you're loving this journey, Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications to catch every chapter of this incredible love story. Kale laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that grated on the nerves. The king is miles away, playing politics while his little pet is cornered. His protection is just a word. My steel is real. He drew a long, wicked-looking knife, its edge gleaming in the firelight. I can take the pup now, or I can wait for you to birth it. But either way, it is coming with me. It is the blood of my blood. His men fanned out, their expressions a mixture of avarice and menace. They were closing the net. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her resolve did not waver. She had to buy time. Time for what? She didn't know. A miracle. The return of a king. "And what will you do with the pup, Kale?" she asked, her voice steady, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. The tactic seemed to momentarily disarm him. "It will be raised as befits the heir of Stone Creek," he said, puffing out his chest. "It will be a great alpha, like my brother." "Like Valerius?" Ilara let out a short, sharp laugh of her own, devoid of any humor. "You want to raise my daughter to be a monster like him? A bully who mistakes cruelty for strength? A male so insecure he had to beat and belittle his mate to feel powerful?" Her words struck a nerve. Kyle's face darkened with rage. Several of his men glanced at each other, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They had all known Valerius's temper. They had all seen his treatment of her. "Silence, you worthless bitch," Kyle snarled. "You are not fit to speak his name." "I am the one who carries his child," she shot back, her voice rising, filled with a righteous fury she had suppressed for years. "I am the one who endured his rages, who nursed the wounds he gave me in private. I know precisely what he was, and I will burn in the eternal ice before I let my child become anything like him." She took a step forward, a bold, unexpected move that made the warriors tense. "Look at you," she said, her gaze sweeping over them, dismissing Kale and speaking directly to his men. "You followed Valerius out of fear. Now you follow this lesser version of him out of greed. You think this pup is your key to power, a symbol you can rally behind. But you are wrong. This pup is a person, a child, and you would tear her from her mother for the sake of your own pathetic ambition." "I told you to be silent." Kyle lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm. His grip was like iron, bruising her skin. Ilara cried out, more in anger than in pain. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. A dam of grief and fear and rage that had been building for years finally broke. A wave of pure, undiluted maternal fury erupted from her. It was not a physical force, but it was just as powerful. Her scent, the scent that had always been quiet and subdued, exploded from her. It was not the scent of an omega or even an alpha. It was something new, something no one in the room had ever experienced. It was the scent of a mother protecting her young, a primal force of nature, as undeniable as a landslide, as fierce as a forest fire. It was the scent of pure, unyielding love and absolute lethal intent. It smelled of earth and stone, of lightning and blood, of a promise of life, and a threat of death all at once. The warriors stumbled back, their eyes wide with shock and a sudden instinctual fear. Their wolves, the beasts that lived within them, whimpered and recoiled from this unprecedented display of maternal power. It was an authority that superseded pack hierarchy, a law older than any alpha's decree. Even Kyle, his hand still clamped on her arm, froze. He stared at her, his cruel smirk gone, replaced by disbelief and a dawning horror. Her eyes, usually so soft and haunted, were blazing with a terrifying light. The scar on her face seemed to glow, no longer a mark of victimhood, but a warrior's sigil. It was at that precise moment that the world, outside the cabin, erupted into chaos. A roar, So deep and powerful it shook the very foundations of the building, echoed through the forest. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. It was the sound of a king who had returned to find his sanctuary defiled. The door, or what was left of it, was filled with a terrifying silhouette. Theron stood there, but he was not the calm, measured king she knew. His eyes were glowing with a molten golden light, the raw power of his wolf form barely contained beneath his skin. Fangs elongated, his features were twisted into a mask of absolute rage. Behind him stood the warriors of his royal pack, silent, elite killers, their weapons drawn. "Get your hand off my mate." Theron's voice was not a human sound. It was a low, guttural snarl that promised a slow, agonizing death. Kale, paralyzed by fear, released her arm as if he had been burned. He scrambled backward, falling over his own feet. His men, who had been so confident moments before, were now dropping their weapons, their faces ashen with terror. They knew they were dead. Theron's golden gaze swept the room, taking in the scene, the splintered door, the cornered men, Kale cowering on the floor. Then his eyes landed on Ilara. The fury in his expression instantly melted away, replaced by a wave of desperate concern. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, ignoring Kale and his men completely. He went straight to her, his large hands hovering over her as if he were afraid to touch her, checking her for injuries with his eyes alone. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice now a raw, ragged whisper, the snarl gone, replaced by a gut-wrenching tenderness. "He did not harm you? The pup?" "We are fine," she breathed, her own adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving her trembling. "I am fine." He gently took her arm, his touch infinitely careful as he examined the bruises already forming where Kale had grabbed her. A fresh wave of murderous rage flashed in his eyes as he looked at the marks. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her scar with a reverence that made her want to weep. "You are the bravest wolf I have ever known," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "My brave mate." The word hung in the air between them. Mate. He had said it. Not just a word of protection, but a claim. A truth. Behind them, Kyle began to crawl toward the door. Theron didn't even turn around. "Take him," he commanded his guards, his voice returning to the cold, hard tone of a king passing sentence. "And his men. They will be tried for treason, for threatening the queen and the heir to the throne." Queen. Heir. The words echoed in the stunned silence. Kale froze, his face a mask of utter despair. He had not just attacked a lone Omega. He had attacked the king's chosen mate, his future Luna Queen. And in doing so, he had not only sealed his own fate, but he had solidified hers. Theron turned his back on the chaos as his guards efficiently and brutally subdued the intruders. He had eyes only for Ilara. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in his gaze she saw her future. Not as an outcast, but as a beloved queen. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not as a vessel for a painful past, but as the mother of a joyful future. She was home. Have you ever seen a love story transform two souls so completely? Comment below with your favorite moment from Ilara and Theron's journey so far. The journey to the Citadel was a stark contrast to her desperate flight through the wilderness. They traveled in a guarded procession, with Theron riding a massive black stallion beside the covered litter he had insisted she use. The King's Guards, the elite royal pack, formed a formidable perimeter around them. Wolves who had once scorned her or ignored her now averted their eyes or bowed their heads in deference. The news of what had happened, of Kale's treason and the king's declaration, had spread like wildfire. She was no longer Ilara the outcast. She was Ilara, the king's mate, the queen. The title felt strange, a borrowed cloak that didn't quite fit her shoulders. She still saw the scarred, frightened girl in her reflection, but when she caught Theron's eye, he looked at her as if she were already wearing a crown. The citadel was not a dark, grim fortress as she had imagined. It was a marvel of stone and timber built into the side of a mountain, overlooking a vast, fertile valley. It was a place of light and life, with soaring towers, open courtyards, and waterfalls that cascaded down the mountainside into crystal-clear pools. It was the heart of the kingdom, and it was to be her new home. Theron led her through the grand halls, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The court fell silent as they passed, their faces a mixture of shock, curiosity, and awe. She was not what they had expected in a queen. She was not from a powerful bloodline. She was visibly pregnant with another male's child. And the scar on her face was a clear mark of a difficult past. She could feel their judgment, their whispers. But for the first time in her life, it didn't touch her. Theron's acceptance was a shield, his devotion an impenetrable armor. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Their opinions were meaningless. The only opinion that mattered was from the male who walked beside her, whose gaze held nothing but adoration. He took her to a suite of rooms in the highest tower, with a balcony that overlooked the entire kingdom. The rooms were beautiful, furnished with polished wood and soft fabrics in shades of cream and deep blue, but they were also comfortable, with a large fireplace and shelves already filled with books. "This will be our home," he said, his voice soft as he stood behind her on the balcony, the wind gently teasing her hair. "If you will have it. If you will have me." She turned in his arms to face him. The setting sun cast a golden glow over them, illuminating the earnest, vulnerable question in his eyes. The powerful Alpha King, who commanded armies and ruled a continent, was asking for her acceptance. "How could you choose me?" she whispered, the last vestiges of her old insecurity clinging to her. "I am broken. I carry the child of a man you should hate." "I do not see brokenness," he said, his hand coming up to gently trace her scar. "I see strength. I see the story of a survivor who protected the innocent life she carried against all odds. I could never hate a child, Alara. Especially not this child. Not your child." He knelt before her, the king of all wolves, in his own citadel, before his entire court could have been watching, knelt in the golden light of sunset before the pregnant, scarred Omega he had found half dead in the snow. It was an act of such profound humility and devotion that it took her breath away. He took both of her hands in his gaze fixed on hers, his twilight eyes burning with an ancient, powerful love. "I have been king for a very long time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have had power. I have had a kingdom. But my life was a silent, empty hall, until you and the little one you carry are the heart that my kingdom has been missing. You are the heart that I have been missing." He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. "Alara of Nopak, mother of a new hope, I am Theron, and I am yours, if you will claim me. Be my mate, be my queen. Let me be a father to your daughter. Let us build a family from the broken pieces of our pasts." Tears streamed freely down her face, but they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic joy. The wounds of her past, the years of pain and rejection, were being washed away by the sheer, unconditional force of his love. He was not just accepting her baggage, he was treasuring it as a part of her story. He was not just tolerating her child, he was claiming the pup as his own. "Yes," she breathed, the word a sob and a prayer all at once. "Yes, I will." He rose to his feet and pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms wrapping around her and her precious belly. He held her as if she were the most priceless treasure in his kingdom, and he buried his face in her hair. "This child of your heart," he vowed, his voice a low, sacred rumble against her ear. is the child of my soul. You are my mate. You are my joy. You are my home. She clung to him, her own heart overflowing. The silence she had lived in for so long was finally filled. It was filled with the steady beat of his heart, the promise of his words, and the hope of a future she had never dared to dream of. The outcast had found her place. The rejected one had been chosen. And the pain of her past was finally being healed by the joy of a king's love. The seasons turned, the snows melted from the high peaks, and the valley below the citadel burst into a riot of green life. Alara's belly grew, and with it, her confidence and her peace. She was no longer the timid, haunted she-wolf from the forest. She was Luna Queen Ilara, and she wore her title with a quiet grace that earned the respect of even the most skeptical members of the court. Her scar, once a source of deep shame, was now seen as a mark of her resilience, a symbol of the strength that had captured the king's heart. Her muted scent, once deemed a flaw, became a thing of wonder, a sign of her unique and powerful maternal spirit. She found her role not in politics or power, but in compassion. She established homes for orphaned pups and aid for wolves who, like her, had been cast out or abused by their packs. She ruled with the heart of a mother, and the kingdom flourished under her gentle influence. Theron was her constant shadow, her unwavering partner. He delighted in every aspect of her pregnancy, his reverence for her, and the life she carried never waning. He would spend hours with his hand on her belly, speaking in low, soft tones to his unborn daughter, telling her stories of the stars and the ancient forests. He was no longer just a king, he was a mate, a doting future father, his ancient loneliness completely erased by the warmth of the family they were building. He made sure the entire kingdom understood that this child was his. He publicly declared her his heir, the future alpha of the royal pack, silencing any whispers about bloodlines or legitimacy with a single, unchallengeable decree. The pup was not Valerius's legacy. She was the foundation of the Theron and Alara's dynasty. The day she went into labor, the entire citadel held its breath. Theron never left her side, his strength her anchor through the pain. He held her hand, wiped the sweat from her brow, and murmured words of love and encouragement. His presence a calm, steady rock in the storm of childbirth. And then, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, their daughter was born. She was perfect. A tiny, beautiful pup with a dusting of dark hair like her father's, and a pair of wide, curious eyes the exact color of her mother's. She did not cry, but looked around the room with a calm, serene wisdom, as if she already understood the significance of her arrival. Theron took the baby from the midwife, his large, calloused hands impossibly gentle as he held his daughter for the first time. He looked down at her, and the formidable Alpha King, the wolf who had ruled for centuries, was undone. Tears welled in his twilight eyes as he looked at the tiny life in his arms, a look of pure, unadulterated love on his face. Lyra, he whispered, the name sounding like a poem. For the light she brings. He placed the baby, their Lyra, into Alara's arms. As Alara held her daughter, felt the warm, solid weight of her against her chest, the last fractured pieces of her soul clicked into place. The final wound was healed. This child was not born of pain. She was born of love, triumph, and hope. She was the living, breathing proof that the deepest of wounds could heal, that a new life could grow in the place where the old one had been broken. The little pup, so loved, so wanted, was the embodiment of their joy. Her past was not erased, but it no longer had any power over her. It was simply the long, winding path that had, against all odds, led her home. This moment right here is pure magic. If you're feeling emotional, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think baby Lyra's future holds. A year later, on the first anniversary of the day he had found her in the snow, Theron led Alara and a toddling Lyra back to the small cabin in the Blackwood. It was exactly as they had left it, a quiet, peaceful sanctuary in the heart of the wilderness. A fire was already burning in the hearth, and the late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Lyra, who was now a sturdy, curious toddler with her father's fearless nature, immediately made her way to the thick fur rug before the fire, plopping down to play with a small carved wooden wolf Theron had made for her. Alara watched her, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The sight of her daughter, safe and happy in the very place her own life had been saved, was a perfect, beautiful circle. Theron came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their child play, the fire crackling a peaceful rhythm beside them. "A year ago," Theron murmured into her hair, "I found you in this forest. You were half frozen, starving, and alone. But you were not broken. You were fighting." Alara leaned back against his solid warmth, her hand covering his where they were clasped over her stomach. "I was terrified," she confessed softly. "I thought I was going to die. I thought my pup would die with me." "But you didn't give up," he insisted. "Even unconscious, your spirit was roaring, a blizzard of maternal protectiveness. It's what I sensed first. Not your fear, but your strength." He turned her in his arms to face him. He looked at her with the same intense adoration he had on the day he had claimed her as his mate. His love had not diminished with time, it had only deepened, its roots growing stronger with each passing day. "You saved me, Alara," he said, his voice raw with sincerity. "I was a king of a vast and empty land, a ruler of a silent heart. You and Lyra filled it. You gave my life a purpose beyond duty. You gave it joy." He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on the silver line of her scar. He no longer avoided it. He touched it with a tenderness that had long ago erased all its old pain, transforming it from a mark of cruelty into a symbol of their story. It was the map that had led him to her heart. From pain to joy, from darkness to light. Alara's transformation is complete. If this story touched your heart, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next epic tale. "Some marks are carved on the skin," he whispered, his voice full of love and awe, echoing a thought she'd had long ago but transforming its meaning entirely. "And I have learned to read them. Yours tells the story of the strongest, bravest wolf I have ever known, the story of my queen." He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was full of love, gratitude, and the promise of 1,000 more tomorrows. It was a kiss of homecoming, of a future built, of a family found. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft, silent flakes dusting the ancient pines. But inside the cabin, there was only warmth. There was only light. There was only the sound of a crackling fire, the soft babble of a happy child, and the quiet, steady beat of two hearts that had found their home in each other. The pain was a distant memory, a ghost long since banished by the bright, enduring sun of their love. If this story of resilience, redemption, and true love moved you, give it a like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs to hear a tale of hope today. Thank you for joining us on Alara and Theron's journey. Until next time, may you find your own light in the darkness.